Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is a special edition of Aragon Live, our video and audio podcast. And today we are talking about the world of content and document intelligence. This is Jim Lundy, founder and CEO of Aragon Research. And with me today, we've got Hendrik Bartel, who's the founder and CEO of a company called PostSig. And Hendrik, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
And I'm going to let Hendrik talk about himself and a little quick brief intro on my side. Hendrik is a world-class, battle-tested startup founder, has had multiple companies, and he founded PostSig to take on this problem that we see, in all the decades of work, of the content management, document management, imaging space that I've been in for 25 years. And it's very, very inefficient management of documents and agreements once they're completed, like i.e. the post-signature process. So, Hendrik, well, you and I know each other. How about you getting to know the audience and give yourself an overview of your company, PostSig?
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. So as you said, I've been building companies for a little while here, and the past two companies that we've built as a team were both in the capital market space. We're building novel data sets that were bought by investors, hedge funds, asset managers, asset owners. So really building world-class data sets that can be used for the investment use case. After both of these companies were acquired, what we saw is that the capital markets industry as a whole spends about $40 billion a year on data. It's a huge spend, and it's still going up by a CAGR of over 10% year over year. So investments are fueled by data, and all of this $40 billion spend is secured by millions and millions of license agreements on how you can and can't use these data sets and what you're allowed to do. So what we saw in our time as market data vendors, was that companies, buyers of these data sets, are heavily negotiating the usage rights, as they should, right? They're spending lots of money on this. And then what we also saw is, whilst you're spending tons of time in these negotiation cycles, is that as soon as the paper is signed, as soon as the lawyers got everything in the agreement that they wanted, as soon as that agreement is signed, literally everyone forgets the next day what they actually had signed and what they can and can't do with the data that they've now bought and licensed and hard fought for. So that was sort of like the impetus for PostSig, is bringing clarity about these license agreements, and the clarity shouldn't stem from the legal department, because the operators are in a different silos than the legal departments. So going back to them and constantly asking them about what I can and can't do with these data sets had long lead times and long answers, and was very costly. So the impetus for PostSig was really trying to figure out, can we move the document intelligence, can we move the post-signature intelligence over to the folks who are actually using and operating the agreements?
Well, I mean, Hendrik's a fascinating story, and I'd say it really kind of highlights this thing that's been overlooked for a long time, relative to understanding what's inside of these agreements and these documents. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, given the current climate, how is the message of efficiency and savings resonating with some of your potential clients?
I think it resonates really, really well, obviously. Like we said, there's a $40 billion spend, and capital markets participants are spending more and more on data. However, they also need to be more efficient. So are they hiring that many more people to sort of like deal with the licenses? Are they hiring more market data vendors? Are they hiring more engineers to now figure out what they can and can't do with the data, and how to operationalize these data sets? And then also on the back end, figure out whether or not these data sets have actually been used or have been attributed to returns. Is there value in these data sets? So all of these analyses are not proportionally staffed to the spend. So I think there is a huge potential for building better scalability, better information flow, better insights, and ultimately allowing the user to also sort of like objectively renegotiate once the time is up for renegotiation. So yes, I think there is an appeal to making this a lot more efficient and scalable.
Yeah, and by the way, just since you mentioned some of the spending in capital markets, we have forecast data and probably have, you look at content management, content automation, transaction management, you're almost looking at $100 billion market forecast over the next couple of years. So there's a lot of spending on this stuff, and a lot of people don't know what they're spending. But one of the things I want to bring out is your focus on this post-signature seems like it's a key differentiator. And a lot of people listening to this podcast are familiar with enterprise content management providers, as well as the smaller market of contract lifecycle management or CLM. Now, your approach is fundamentally different. Can you just talk about how your approach is different than, understanding content versus just the process of managing it?
Yeah, I think CLMs do a fantastic job in what they're built for. They're built for efficiency in negotiating an agreement, getting the right terms on the paper, managing the term flow, and then making sure there's a signature on the paper in order to execute on the contract. However, that whole workflow happens within the legal department. The legal department is the originator of the CLM. They're the user of the CLM, but they're not the ultimate user of the data or the service that is being acquired. That is happening in different groups. That is happening within the operations group, within the engineering group. It's happening somewhere else in the organization. And unfortunately, a lot of these organizations are very siloed. So that yes, when you have a CLM, it is there to, again, negotiate the contract, but is not there to figure out how to best use the contract, figure out whether or not you have the right user numbers, figure out whether or not the right people are using it in the office, in a geography, figuring out whether or not you're using the data at the right time of the day, and then also figuring out whether or not you've actually used the data in the end of the day. Oftentimes, a renewal process happens sort of like a few months before the agreement is up, and sort of like you see, oh wow, this data set is coming up for renewal. So the first thing as a vendor manager, as a data manager, is I call the person who's sort of like in charge of the data set. However, that person might oftentimes be a portfolio manager, a trader, someone who is very busy. And now I call that person and say, hey, Jim, are you still using this data set? Well, first of all, who are you? I don't even know you. Why are you calling me? Why are you questioning my authority that I'm using this data set, or if I'm using this data set? Of course, we're using the data. So it's a budget item, and now move on. Try to figure out how to renegotiate a deal that works for all of us. So all of these things are post-signature. They're not pre-signature. They're part of the usage of the data and not the negotiation of the agreement.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's dive a little further and shift a little bit to some of what I'm kind of calling your secret sauce.
Mm.
And one of your offerings is called Lineage AI. And to me, it feels like that kind of like sounds like one of the core parts of your platform. Can you kind of give us a little in-depth insight into Lineage AI and maybe the kinds of insights it can provide to potential customers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way we look at post-signature documents is through a hierarchy, right? If you unravel the way you are talking to a vendor, and you're figuring out all the steps it takes to now get to an agreement with that vendor, that's how we thought about Lineage AI. Lineage AI really gives us the hierarchical order of the agreement stack, of the agreement information. Usually you start an engagement with the vendor, with a new partner with an NDA. That is agreement number one. From there, you move into a trial agreement, maybe. From there, then you move into a service order. The service order is then governed with an MSA, with an SLA, with other terms. After time, you decide to buy another product from that vendor. So you now get another service order. However, that service order now comes with an addendum because it has slightly different terms. So that addendum now is very specific to a very specific set of products. So that is very much what we thought about when we envisioned Lineage AI, sort of like the intelligence of the contract stack, of the document stack, when these documents were executed, which terms are higher in their order, which terms pertain to a certain product. So really figuring all of that out. It's not just figuring out the data that sits in the contracts. That is one part, and extracting data out of a document is commodity today. However, it's figuring out how these different documents link with each other and allowing the user to find the pertinent information and linking the pertinent information to certain sets within the documents or document set. So that's really what we think about Lineage AI, and how we sort of like use Lineage AI. It's really the backbone of a contract structure within an organization.
Yeah, I mean, I got to say, Hendrik, you got a vast understanding of data from your previous lives. So, I think, we kind of call what you're doing content intelligence, and it sounds, and I've seen a demo, and it feels very fast as well. But one of the things you mentioned two markets, capital markets, and an area of like loan documents, which, are very, very important to enterprises. Can you talk about those markets and how maybe some of those firms might look at using PostSig?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is if you look at capital markets and what a firm or a certain set of firm does within capital markets, I think they trade, they do deals, they sell companies, they deal with limited partners, they ingest capital. So all of these different functions within a firm within the capital markets is governed by different set of documents. So what we've built here at PostSig is really a platform. It's not just a point solution for market data or operational agreements. It really allows a capital markets firm to take advantage of the intelligence that is now sort of like sitting in a SharePoint drive, not really extracted out of these documents, and making it part and parcel of, if you will, of the OS of the firm, and extracting this intelligence and making for a smoother, more scalable, faster moving operation. So you have your first set of documents that is being used for the trade and for the investment groups, really figuring out what you can and can't do with certain set of data. Then there are documents that you use for your marketing or for your sales efforts. So those are your CRMs, those are um, your AWS, et cetera, et cetera. All of those are documents that are being mined for intelligence so that you're up for better compliance, better invoice recognition, better use of the data and making sure that you get what you've paid for. However, then you shift your focus within the firm and you're trying to figure out, okay, what is a firm actually invested in? So you see that maybe, like you said, they originate loans, or they have vast amounts of loan documents. Those are very thick document types that have covenants in there. So trying to figure out what the covenants are, what are the penalties if a loan is not prepaid at a certain time. Really moving all of that into a database, filtering not only the data, but building the insights, building the knowledge, building the wisdom out of all of that. Moving on to maybe real assets that you're holding, like leases, hundreds and hundreds of leases, trying to figure out a real-time rent roll, trying to figure out how you can now best position your lease portfolio. Moving on sort of like deal origination. Are you getting spammed by deals that your firm is not interested in? So really trying to figure out and operationalizing this, making all of this more scalable, making all of this smoother, and giving you all the intelligence that comes post signature, not as part of the negotiation of an agreement. That is totally understood. That's very broad. That we know what the efficiencies are there. But once the rubber hits the road, once the document is signed, and now squeezing the juice out of that document, I think that's really what we're here for at PostSig.
I mean, the capital market sounds fascinating. You mentioned some of the other areas. I mean, one of the things we talked about in the pre-call is, areas, even horizontal areas like NDA. Can you talk about some of those other markets that you're starting to see interest in?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said earlier, sort of like NDA is like really the first real document that you sign when you begin a new relationship. However, oftentimes NDAs are signed somewhere in the organization without a lot of oversight, and it's a high volume document. However, what we've also seen sometimes is that people don't really pay attention what's now in the NDA. Is it a perpetual NDA? Is the NDA governed by a non-traditional jurisdiction? Do you have? We've seen NDAs that have audit rights. We have seen NDAs that have non-poaching clauses. So we've sort of like built a part of the system now that can highlight risks as early as an NDA, sort of like building what we call it as NDA insights. So you ingest an NDA and you quickly figure out whether or not that NDA is actually okay for your firm, or are you seeing sort of like a vast majority of NDAs being signed at a certain branch? Can you track NDA velocity? Is there some branch manager that is signing hundreds of NDAs that are sort of like outside of the norm that you would usually sign? So really ingesting intelligence as early as an NDA. That's, for example, what we're doing with NDA Insights. On the other side of that is we're also looking at invoices. We've built sort of like intelligent invoice reconciliation. So you and I have agreed on a deal. We've known each other for a long time. You tell me, hey, first year's 20% off, and then after that, we're going to go sort of like more towards normal pricing. That may all be captured in a sales order. However, the finance department that sends you the invoice sort of really didn't like they forgot the discount in there. So you're getting your full fair invoice for 100K for the first year. And now you can take your invoice, you just push it into PostSig. The invoice automatically through Lineage AI now finds its service order, finds all of the accompanying documents, basically says, hey, look, you've agreed on the discount 20%. That's a red flag in the system. You're overpaying, they're overcharging you. So now from within the system, you can then quickly say, hey, listen, let's just send an email to the finance department with all the evidence behind it that we had actually agreed on a different deal, so that you can issue me a new invoice. So really, from NDA insights to intelligent invoice reconciliation over to a whole set of invoice or document intelligence is really what we're building here at PostSig.
Oh, I have to follow up, Hendrik. You mentioned a little gem of a nugget there where you said that the branch manager might be signing too many NDAs. So it sounds like there's real intelligence can pick up an anomaly, like maybe potentially, for example, fraud. Maybe that guy shouldn't be signing that many.
Maybe that guy shouldn't be signing that many. Maybe he doesn't even have the authority. Maybe you have a sales guy in the organization who is signing NDAs, but oh, by the way, a sales guy is not allowed to sign an NDA. It actually should go through the legal department. So really capturing these nuances within an organization, but then also again, that is not data, that becomes an insight. So I'm a huge believer in what's called knowledge hierarchy. That's sort of like a theory out of the 60s and 70s. And that theory basically says that, listen, data becomes very quickly a commodity, but it is what you make out of that data, because that data can be converted into knowledge. Then knowledge becomes an insight, and ultimately insights become wisdom, so that your business runs much better and more intelligently. And I think really that's sort of like at the core and principle what we're building here.
Now, while we've been covering the area of content intelligence and content AI, broadly, voice, video, image, and documents, many solutions are starting to incorporate AI, and we talked about this in the pre-call prep. But it feels like you're doing a little more in-depth, understanding of documents and content more than others. Can you just kind of talk about that a little bit more on the secret sauce, that because you're doing more than we see other people doing?
I think it goes back to the point that we just discussed. Is sort of like, yes, in the day and age that we're living, with AI, content extraction becomes a commodity. So quickly showing a summary of a certain phrase or so, you can question the value of that, right? It makes me understand what's there much faster. However, capturing all the key terms, but then relating the key terms to a renewal, an invoice, an NDA, the agreement as a whole. I think that's where really the value starts to rise up to the top, not just sort of like extracting a number of terms, but then relating that to the business in itself. I think that's really content intelligence, document intelligence at its best, where we can really excel and making sure that the user has at their fingertips, for example, objective renegotiation notes, rather than sort of like calling around the organization and asking subjective questions on whether or not a data set has been used once or twice and whether or not that pays for the cost of the data set. It's really pulling all the objective data together, mining that and building the insight that yes, you've used that data set last year. Is it worth 100K? Maybe not from a usage perspective. So maybe negotiate for something more favorable, but don't get rid of the data set.
Well, Hendrik, this has been incredibly insightful, and you're tapping into a significant need in the market. In fact, we think that about 98% of all content in the world is dark, meaning that you can't see into it, you don't understand it, and so it just sits there. So before we wrap up, just can you give us maybe a little, hint on what's on the horizon for PostSig? What can we expect to see from you in the near future?
I mean, we're really laser focused on continuing to build out the capabilities of the platform that we have today. Again, I think we are a lot more than just a point solution. It's really a platform, but the platform needs to deliver the insights to the user, and every user within a private equity office, within a hedge fund, within an asset manager has different questions about the contracts, the papers they own. So really figuring out how we can take something much broader into a platform and making that easy to use. We believe there's a massive opportunity to take contract management really as a strategic advantage. These are not static documents that should just sit on a dark SharePoint drive or a Google Drive and just accumulate dust. They can actually, they're strategic business assets that we want to make work for you, that we want to put to work for you. So they're a strategic advantage oftentimes, and you don't even know the gold mine that you're sitting on. And our vision is really a world where contracts are not the burden, but a powerful tool for the business success, for the business execution. And we're really committed to making that a reality. And that's part and parcel of the vision that we're executing on here.
Well, Hendrik, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Very informative. For our audience and for more information, people can go to postsig.com, which is the website where Lineage AI is featured. We'll be having the podcast available there, as well as aragonresearch.com. And again, we're continually talking about this market. Obviously, PostSig is one of the vendors to watch. So, Hendrik, thank you again.
Thank you, Jim.